Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Well, folks, in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about coachability. I did a video on coachability before about a year ago, but it was pretty straightforward. It was maybe from a very 100 level, but let's up our game a little bit today and talk a little bit about coachability, because coachability, and one of the things we didn't really hone in on too much, coachability, when you're talking about organizational transformation, right? We do dive in talking about organizations because that's typically where we congregate the most, not always, but the most. Then, of course, we have our groups that we're associated, our clubs, our groups, our churches, our friend groups, our families, right? So it's all connected. It's all an interconnected tapestry. But we dive in talking a little bit about the organizations because that's typically on the day-to-day where we come together as groups, as teams, right? So with that as a preface, let me continue. So coachability. Oftentimes when we're thinking about coachability, we're thinking about currently March Madness for NCAA basketball is going on in the United States. So, of course, there are quite a few people, many millions, immersed in that, as well as other significant things going on all over the world. But when you think of coachability, a lot of times what folks reflects to is the coachability of a team or team members, right? Players on a team, for example, right? How coachable are they? Do they listen? Are they attentive? Are they really capturing the essence of the message of what's being told to them? Are they able to take what's being told to them and then apply that, and then from that application grow from there's a little trial and error, but there's a growth, right, that occurs. And are they dedicated to that growth day in and day out, not just for just for a short time, and then they kind of just settle in, right? There's a curve, there's a slope, let's say glide slope, but a slope, right, an ascending slope that really represents our coachability and the application of what is the result of that coachability. So much of what I spoke about in a previous video, I guess about a year ago or more, was so much more oriented toward the team members, right? Of which we all have been a part at some point, we hope. But that coachability also applies to the leaders of our teams, right? Departments, site leaders, division, enterprise level, on and on and on, government, all of it, right? It doesn't really matter what you're a leader of, what size of the group is. There has to be a coachability. And then what you often see in organizations is a kind of a canned, we'll say management training, right? Or some leadership training. Fairly canned, fine. But it isn't necessarily in the canned programs that you are going to find the wisdom that you need, not only to coach well and to lead well, but also to be effective, right? So where should folks often turn? History, folks. Look in history. And it doesn't matter, look, folks, it doesn't matter if you are the leader of a team or a small group at any stage. Whatever stage you are in your leadership journey, you should be referencing history. What worked, what didn't work, why didn't something work, and then learn from those lessons. Because what happens is, and this happens in culture just as much as it can happen in organizations, and with organizations changing their makeup between the team members and leaders, that becomes your cycle, right? You have a new leader, you have new team members, or there is over time maybe a change, right? A change in the makeup of who your team is, right? And so what happens is an organization or a team goes through cycles, right? And we see this now. We can also see this in what? In history. We can see this with countries. We can see this in continents and countries and many kinds of groupings and so forth, right? That there are cycles, right? Some have shorter cycles, some have longer cycles. But what is true about some of these cycles is this, is that if you're not effective, you're going to hasten that cycle in the negative sense, right? So if you're an ineffective leader, for example, what are you going to do? You're going to hasten, let's use March Madness. You're going to lose games. You're not even going to make it to a tournament, okay? And it happens, right? No different than if you were, but are you developing? That is the key thing. There are stages of development, but once you're achieving, getting wins, right? Once you're getting wins and building, right, elements of your team's culture, and that is growing, right, then you become, over time, if it's a school, for basketball, for example, you could become a powerhouse. Now, you maintain the standards and you continue to grow and to continue to build upon, then you're going to have what? There's going to be a legacy, a longevity to that growth. Now, winning teams that get comfortable, right? So let's say you won a championship last year and you come into the new year and in your mind's eye, you're not hungry, right? A good example of this is obviously in the dramatic sense is Rocky, right? I think it's Rocky 3, right? He learns, in the beginning, the first couple of movies, he's, I would hope that everybody's at least seen one of the movies at this point. But in the beginning, he's hungry, right? He's hungry. He wants to do well. He wants to be competitive, right? He isn't even having an expectation that he's going to win, but he has an expectation of himself to give it everything he's got, right? And this is quintessential, folks. A nice little snapshot for a movie that represents the reality of a larger culture, of cultures, right? Are you hungry to continue to maintain, or not to maintain, but to grow once you're given the opportunity? And then who benefits from that opportunity? Who benefits? Now, we can use the movie sense, right? Who benefits from that opportunity? His wife benefits after the second movie, spoiler alert, he wins. But his wife benefits, has a kid, the whole thing. His community starts to benefit from him. He now also represents what? Kind of a never give up, right? Never give up trying to do your best and to give your best in all ways, right? In whatever way that you have talent, right? So there's that. There is more than just, benefiting from what he can, purchase in his life and these kinds of things, but it is so much more about the value, right, of the human spirit, right? The human spirit, the heart. And what does that heart mean? And what benefits? Who benefits from that? Now, you take a school that's playing, say, basketball, for example. Same thing. Who benefits when they win? Well, the student body, right? The student body, the local community, right? It generates a livelihood. It generates life. It generates a thriving, a yearning, a celebration, right? It generates, even for teams that don't make it to the final championship, but they get far, right? Far for them, right? One or two rounds may have been, the first time ever, right? That is a significant accomplishment. And it is this kind of, human spirit aspect to all of us that we bring, hopefully to our organizations. Now, you might be thinking, well, that sounds fine and great, but all of that's over there. The things I really care about are my home and my family. Well, look, folks, everything is connected, there isn't anything that we do that isn't connected to everything else that is going on with everybody else, right? So when your organization wins in your community, who benefits from that? Well, you do. Organization does. The local community does, right? Businesses around there do. The local schools and everything else benefit from all of that, right? You start slacking off, right, and become less coachable, and even worse yet, as leaders, you become your inability to find ways to be coached, right? Because you may think, well, I'm a site leader, I've got 100 people at this site and I'm leading them and da 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 da, right? But for the very good leaders, what are you going to see them do? You're going to see them reading and always ever expanding and growing. But it can't just stop with a site leader. This really has to be this coachability in our individual, as leaders and as team members, really. We have to go out and seek wisdom. We have to seek to learn. We have to seek and strive to grow, right? And we can't, and this isn't for our own betterment, right? Everything we do spills over into every one that our lives touch, right? Sure, it starts with your family, but then your friends, and then your other things you're associated with, right? Your churches and your friend groups and your clubs and your associations and everything, right? This goes out to your cities and towns and states and countries and all of that. It is all made up of the little bricks of heart and seeking of wisdom, folks, seeking of knowledge, finding ways to ever improve. And when we don't do that, what happens? Communities suffer, right? The organization suffers for sure. The rest of your team members suffer, right? Local communities suffering, children in those communities, schools, and everything else. And then next thing you know, the environment is suffering. And where does that all originate? The human heart and its desire to seek out knowledge and wisdom, right? And then apply that mercifully, right? To the service of others. Because what's the most common thing that organizations of any size, and it doesn't matter if it's just one of you, really, it's serving your customers, right? You're serving your customers. If you have your home or whatever, and then you have family, you're serving them, and then they're serving, and serving, folks. It is all in the serving, right? And leaders have to understand that that even their teams, right? Those are also customers. They're serving the needs of their team as much as they're serving the needs of the end user of their services, right? Of what product or services that you're involved in creating, right? So everything is touched by everything else, folks. And we have to understand that when we aren't students of wisdom and of higher knowledge, and to reflect on those who have struggled and failed, and then to dissect why and what had occurred, right? Then if we don't do that as well, then what happens is that we aren't learning from the lessons of the past. And you've heard this, everybody's heard this before, and it's kind of said as kind of off the cuff, but it's true, right? If you fail to learn the lessons of the past, you're doomed to repeat, right? The lessons. And this becomes the cycle. So what's the point? The point is we have to break the cycle, break the chain. In the safety world, it's breaking the chain. Breaking that chain of complacency, of not questioning and not stepping up and saying, oh, no. You have to break the chain, the safety chain, right? Break the safety chain so that an accident doesn't occur, so that, bad results don't occur. But you have to break the chain. But there's no way really for you to understand about breaking the chain if you don't know that, hey, you're empowered to break the chain, right? You're empowered by your position, role, responsibility with, say, in your organization, right? You're not going to let somebody step on a forklift and raise them up or, to the, 40 feet in the air at a site. You're just not going to do it, right? Break the chain. You see somebody start to do that. Whoa, stop, right?
And it doesn't matter if you're the site leader or anybody else. These, that's an obvious one, right? Just picked one that's pretty glaring. But there are subtle ones as well, right? It could be poor decisions. If you are a leader and you're not listening to your support staff, right, and you're not taking in inputs, do you think the likelihood of you making mistakes and failing is greater or lesser? I guarantee you it is multiple on exponential levels of worse failure to come. I remember, I would tap my support staff and say, hey, this is what I'm considering, but I'm not certain about how we get there. So let's fill in this image and let's see what makes sense, right? Because the last thing that a leader should ever do is to assume that they know it all, right? That they know everything, that they have all the answers. When you think you have all the answers and you aren't consulting with your support staff who have more information, right? This is the whole idea, is that you're pulling in more information. You're getting more feedback. You're getting a sanity check too in the process, right? To go, hey, yeah, I want to do this. Well, if we do this, this would be the result, right? So there's the if-then scenarios that you encounter in doing this. Now, it doesn't mean the leader doesn't make the final call. They do, but an informed decision. An uninformed decision is also the result of leaders who don't listen to their support staff. So coachability, right? Are you coachable, right? In this sense, is the wisdom of the ages, right? Has it impressed upon you to that, that is your coaching. Leaders at different levels have to sometimes go outside of the normal system to understand history, to understand things that worked and didn't work, right? If I was a leader at a plant that made, I'm just pulling a rabbit out of the hat, and it made tires, and now I'm at somewhere where we're making concrete trusses. I don't know, not trusses, concrete, blocks of some sort for some reason. I don't know, whatever. Two different things, right? Do you think I'm going to walk from one into the other knowing exactly, every correct thing? No. There's a little bit of a curve there, right? Sometimes different product, different services, all those things, right? There are nuances that you have. So you have to be a quick study. You have to be somebody who learns, right? If you just walk into a new site and you just think you know it all, right? Or say you're a division level leader and you have multiple sites, maybe in areas in areas that you've never dealt with before. You don't just walk into these sites knowing that you have it all figured out. There is a learning, right? Are you coachable? Are you coachable to be able to understand? Is that necessity to be wise and more intelligent, right? And be a better servant leader to your team? That is the static coach that is always shining over you or looking down upon you all the time to ask the question. You don't know everything. You need to figure some things out. You need to ask questions. You need to learn. You need to be curious, right? Albert Einstein, being curious. How high he elevated that above so many things, right? Or curiosity. And sometimes that curiosity will prevent you from having what? High turnover, having to do layoffs, high turnover, making knee-jerk reactions to solve problems you think you have all the answers to. Humility also enters into the picture here. So are we coachable to the lessons of the past? Are we? We have to ask ourselves, and it doesn't matter who we are, because in one aspect or another in your own life, personally or professionally, and whether you've, had the opportunity to take on leadership roles at any level, right? Are you coachable? Are you coachable to the lessons of the past, right? Can you and are you driven to elevate your ability to perform as a leader based on the people who came before you? Or are those lessons wasted because you're not listening, you're not paying attention, and you're not understanding that coachability in this sense means that the past and the lessons of it are speaking to you. Are you hearing? Are you hearing? All right, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But remember, you can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. Are you coachable? So important. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.